Welcome, everyone. I'm Andrew Schiff, CEO at the Rhode Island Community Food Bank. Thank you for joining us for today's town hall with Rhode Island's congressional delegation. We're here today to address the cuts that the Trump administration has proposed to health insurance programs, particularly Medicaid, and the federal nutrition programs, including the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. After you hear from Senators Rhode and Whitehouse and Representatives Magaziner and Amo, there's going to be time for questions from the audience. If you have a question, please use the Q&A box. The Q&A icon is at the bottom of your screen. Type in your question. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of the Economic Progress Institute, Weayonnoh Nelson-Davies.
Thanks, Andrew. It is my pleasure to co-host this virtual roundtable with the Rhode Island Community Food Bank. And as Andrew said, I would like to offer my thanks to all of you for joining us this morning, especially our congressional delegation for graciously accepting our invitation to be here as well. Before we start, I do want to acknowledge that these are scary times. I think we need to sit in the reality of what it is. Our immigrant neighbors and communities are living in fear right now. Our nonprofits are at a loss as to how to fulfill their missions and how to serve their communities with federal freeze and lawsuits that are bringing uncertainty about next steps. Civil servants are losing their jobs. Currently, we are having the Congressional Senate vote on a continuing resolution. Will there be a resolution that takes us until April to have a bipartisan decision? Will there be a full-year resolution that takes us to September? Or will the government shut down? We have a budget reconciliation process that is giving instructions to propose cuts to Medicaid and SNAP. So there is a lot of bad news. However, my plea to all of you on this call is to please also acknowledge that despair is not our only option. We have the option to provide information and facts and data about what is really going on. We have the option to come together as a state and come up with our own solutions about how we protect Rhode Islanders. We have the option to hold the line and fight and push back. And so I hope after this conversation, get mad, acknowledge you are scared, and there are people living in fear, but please do not let despair be your only option. Let us come together at the end of today to figure out ways we can move Rhode Island and hopefully the nation forward. And so I would like to start with our first option, some information about what is at stake. Slides, please. So we'll be sharing some information about some of the impacts of these proposed federal cuts on healthcare, SNAP, some local assistance to food and school meals. So first we'll start with healthcare. Next slide, please. Nationally, we have over 100 million people who have health coverage through Medicaid, through the Affordable Care Act marketplaces, and the Children's Health Insurance Program. The budget reconciliation instructions are proposing an $880 billion cut to Medicaid and also shifting some of that back on states. What is the impact for us in Rhode Island? Currently, over 325,000 Rhode Islanders are enrolled in Medicaid. That includes 87,000 children and 29,000 seniors. We're relying on about $3.4 billion in Medicaid costs in Rhode. As we're trying to figure out what that could mean if any of this is shifted to Rhode Island, we could be looking at footing a bill close to $300 million during a time where we're already facing a state budget deficit. In addition to Medicaid, right now, the enhanced premium tax credits that we have received are set to expire at the end of 2025. If that happens, 40,000 Rhode Islanders who depend on that to afford their premiums may see that jump, their premiums jump by an average of 85%. The state is going to need $40 million to fill in that gap if this enhanced tax premium go away. So that is some of the impact we are facing when we look at what's maybe happening with Medicaid. Next slide, please. And SNAP. Nationally, we are anticipating a $230 billion over 4 years cut to SNAP. And these are the instructions that are being given to the House Committee on Agriculture. What does that mean for us in Rhode Island? 144,000 Rhode Islanders, approximately 90,000 households receive SNAP. This is how families are able to afford food. These households are expected, and Rhode Island, we expect in our budget to receive about $340 million in SNAP benefits. And we are trying to figure out what would those cuts mean for us. And so we're giving one example here of what may be possible. If there's a 25% cut to the benefits we receive in Rhode Island, or if that cost is pushed to the state, we will have to figure out as a state to come up with at least $85 million a year if there is a 25% cost shift to Rhode Island. Or we may have to make a decision to cut SNAP benefits for Rhode Islanders. At a 25% cut, if you look at monthly costs, people are receiving about $320 per month. A 25% cut, if you just use those numbers, someone is going to be expected to live on $240 a month to feed their family. And so we're really concerned about what will happen if we lose these SNAP benefits or if this cost is shifted to Rhode Island, where again, we are already expecting a deficit, and 35.8% of our budget relies on federal funding. Next slide, please. Next slide. When it comes to school meals, currently, we depend on a program called the School Meals Community Eligibility Provision. And what does that do? It allows schools in low-income communities to provide free breakfast and lunch to all students, eliminating the burden of presenting information and household application to determine eligibility. And what this also means is respecting the dignity of our children, not to have to prove I am poor and so give me money, give me food versus my colleagues and my schoolmates. This allowed the entire school to be able to provide school for all children. However, the proposal is now that schools, prior to this proposal, if there were 25% of low-income children in the school, all children receive free meals. The threshold had now been moved, or is proposed to be moved to 80%, which means about 24,000 schools in the US, about 12 million children could lose access to free school meals. And this is going to be a high impact for Rhode Island schools as well as Rhode Island children who will no longer be eligible for free school meals. Next slide, please. And this, when we talk about the local food purchase assistance program, is not even when we're thinking of FY 2026 budget, it's the current appropriation. The USDA is now cutting $1 million in federal funding for two important programs. One is the Local Purchase Assistance Program and the Local Purchase School Assistance Program. These programs help schools, childcare programs, and food pantries in 40 states, including Rhode Island. It allows us to buy products directly from local farmers. This cut is going to impact our local farmers, our economy, and our communities right here in Rhode Island. Farm Fresh, who manages the Rhode Island Local Food Purchasing Assistance, estimates that Rhode Island will lose close to $3 million from these two programs, and it will affect 100 small businesses and recipients who depend on locally grown foods. So that is the bad news. That is what we anticipate is coming our way. And it's hard to share this, but it's important that we share it so we can start with that option number one. What is coming to us and how do we plan for it? And now that you have that information, it is my pleasure to introduce a man I greatly admire, our senior senator, Senator Jack Reed, to give us his insight on what is happening in Washington and what we can do about it in Rhode Island. Welcome, Senator Reed.
Well, thank you very much, Weayonnoh, for your very, very insightful and illuminating discussion of the challenges we face because of the Trump administration. I also want to thank and commend Andrew for being a co-host, but also for his many, many years of service to the food bank. He's done a remarkable job. From day one, the Trump administration has been implementing policies that harm Americans. They are committed to enriching the rich and denigrating those who aren't. And that is something that I don't think we can accept. I've never had the experience of serving with the president who so disregards the law and also the constitutional authority of Congress to provide for the funding of programs. As you indicated, Weayonnoh, now they're trying to push through a funding bill. We call it a continuing resolution, which will take us all the way through the end of the fiscal year. And this resolution is going to inflict significant harm, as you've pointed out, in so many different ways. Even before the budget resolution came before us, the Trump administration has canceled programs like the Local Food Purchase Cooperative, if you mentioned, and that's just penny wise and pound foolish. In essence, what they're doing is consciously, deliberately, and harmfully going after what are the most important aspects, I think, of the development, particularly the development of children, and that's good nutrition and good health care. It is a short-run savings, and I would argue they're not even savings, but in the long run, it's going to cause us many, many problems because children who are lacking nutrition and lacking health care become adults that are less productive, and we need productive people to continue to move America forward. And that's what's so troubling about the Trump administration and their approach. They really don't care about anybody unless they have a great deal of money. Now, this is the continuing resolution we're dealing with immediately. But there's a next piece of legislation that will come to us, and that's the reconciliation package. And as Weayonnoh has pointed out, that is going to go after Medicaid and Medicare, Medicaid particularly. What they intend to do is to take over 10 years, $880 billion away from Medicaid. That will be extremely destructive to the healthcare system in Rhode Island across the country. And I think it's important to point out and emphasize the sole purpose of taking this money away is to fund a tax cut for the wealthiest Americans. And that to me is outrageous, indeed probably obscene. We have to be able to invest in the American people and the American economy, not allow the very, very richest to have much more than anyone else. So they're looking for $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, and they intend to take the money from SNAP, from Medicaid, from other programs that are so critical to individuals, but also to our society. As I said, these are the programs that guarantee productive individuals throughout my lifetime, your lifetime, and going into the future. Now, we're going to keep fighting. My colleagues in the House, Congressman Gabe, Congressman Amo, voted against this budget that's coming before us today, this continuing resolution. And I believe my colleague, Senator Whitehouse, will, and I will, because we're going to fight this every step of the way. And in fact, I must and will conclude by saying I'm so fortunate to have people like Seth and Gabe and Sheldon. It really makes me more effective, and I hope I can contribute to their effectiveness. With that, let me stop and recognize my colleague, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Sheldon, take it away, please. Sheldon?
I believe the senator is running a little bit late, so we are going to go to Congressman Gabe Amo next. Oh, it looks like Congressman Magaziner is here.
Hello, can you all hear me? Yes, good. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining. I wish it was under happier circumstances, but here we are. And I am very fortunate to serve in a delegation with Jack Reed and Sheldon Whitehouse and Gabe Amo. We work together as a team, and we understand that our job is to stand up for Rhode Islanders, not for the special interests and not for the out-of-state billionaires. And unfortunately, the White House right now and congressional Republicans are moving aggressively to undercut the middle class and undercut those who are trying to work their way into the middle class and undercut the most vulnerable in our society, all to pay for more tax cuts for the very rich. So there's a couple of things going on right now. As Senator Reed mentioned, Republicans are pushing through a budget bill right now that would continue to give Elon Musk and Donald Trump a blank check to illegally cut programs that people rely on, that Congress has appropriated money for. And one example of that is the USDA program to fund the purchase of local food from local farmers for Rhode Island schools and other purposes through Farm Fresh Rhode Island. There was a good article about this in the Providence Journal today. Farms in Rhode Island that were being paid to provide local food through Farm Fresh to Rhode Island schools are losing that funding. That's obviously bad for farmers, but more importantly, bad for children who deserve good, local, nutritious food. Elon Musk and his army of interns just went in and canceled that funding, even though Congress had appropriated the money for it. They're breaking the law, and congressional Republicans are doing nothing about it. But there is a bigger looming threat, which is the main thing that we're here to talk about today, which is that Donald Trump and congressional Republicans are also working on a tax cut bill, a $4.5 trillion tax cut bill that would overwhelmingly benefit big corporations and the very rich. And in order to pay for this tax cut bill, they are targeting some of the most important bedrock programs in our country that working people rely on, namely Medicaid, which I know Jack and Sheldon are focusing their remarks on today, but also programs like SNAP. And this would be absolutely catastrophic if they are able to push this bill through. Again, Sheldon will go into more detail on Medicaid, but they are trying to cut hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicaid. That would mean that millions of Americans could lose their health insurance, that healthcare premiums would go up, health insurance premiums would go up for everybody, including those that are not on Medicaid, and that healthcare providers like nursing homes and community health centers would lose revenue and go out of business, again, for no good reason other than to pay for tax cuts for the very rich. They are also targeting SNAP, and that's what I want to focus the remainder of my remarks on today. SNAP, as you all know, is an absolutely essential program that helps lower income people and a lot of middle class people put food on the table. 145,000 Rhode Islanders, so about 15% of our state, rely on SNAP to help feed themselves and their families. Of those 145,000 Rhode Islanders, about half of them are families with children. Just taking a step back here, if you cannot put food on the table for yourself or your children, everything else falls apart. If this food aid is cut, then it will be harder for kids to learn if they're going to school hungry. It will be harder for families to stay housed because families are going to have to make terrible decisions about whether to pay rent or whether to buy groceries. It's going to be harder for people to stay healthy because, again, people are going to have to make terrible decisions about, do I put food on the table for my kids or do I pay for my prescriptions? And so these cuts to SNAP that Republicans are trying to push through not only mean that more people will go hungry in our state, in our country, but it also will impact education, impact health, impact housing, and impact economic security generally for thousands of Rhode Islanders and millions of Americans. They have instructed the House Agriculture Committee to cut $230 billion as part of their plan to pay for these tax cuts. Now, under the House Agriculture Committee, there's a lot of programs, but SNAP is by far the largest. There is no way that they are going to hit that target of $230 billion without deep cuts to SNAP, to food assistance for people who need it, particularly children. And again, this is all to pay for tax cuts for Donald Trump and Elon Musk and their billionaire friends at Mar-a-Lago. The cruelty of it is just unimaginable. It'll impact also, of course, small businesses, retailers, farmers, the people who sell food and utilize SNAP to do that. So the second order effects are going to be massive as well. Here's the good news. The good news is that for all of this, we only need 4 Republicans in the House to do the right thing and stand up for their constituents to stop this bill in its tracks. In the House of Representatives, Republicans only have a 4-seat majority with full attendance. So we only need 4 to stand up and do the right thing. And that is achievable. Just using SNAP as an example, just to level set here. In Rhode Island, a little less than 15% of households are enrolled in SNAP. There are Republican members of Congress who have a far higher percentage of their constituents in SNAP. Nicole Maliotakis from New York State has 17% of her constituents in SNAP. David Valadao, who's always on the list of one of the most vulnerable House Republicans, has 23% of his constituents in SNAP. And so all we need is to convince a handful of these Republican members not to throw thousands of their voters under the bus to pay for tax cuts for billionaires, to find a spine and to stand up and do the right thing. And that's why events like this are so important. So, along with Gabe and Sheldon and Jack, I am always talking to my Republican colleagues and nagging them about this, but they need to feel the public pressure as well. We need to be vocal through the media. We need to be vocal on social media in particular, which is where more and more people are getting their news. And we need to stand united all across the country against these cuts, including the cuts to SNAP. So our delegation from Rhode Island, we know the assignment. We know what our job is. Our job is to hold the line and to find those 4 Republicans and give them the courage that they need to do the right thing. But you all have a role to play in this as well. So post on social media, talk to people, be vocal, and together we will join a national movement that will stop this bad bill in its tracks. I see that Senator Whitehouse has joined, so I will hand it over to him now. Thank you all.
Thank you, Seth, and thank you all for joining. It is important to gather in these tough times because feeling distressed and angry is not helped by also feeling solitary. So it's good to continue this kind of outreach. And I'm glad that you are, and I'm hoping that you're continuing to do that and do more and more of it. Medicaid is obviously on the chopping block. The very bad news is that in the House budget resolution bill, they targeted $880 billion in cuts from the account that has Medicaid. And you can't possibly get to that number without enormous cuts to Medicaid. So it is an obvious deduction, an obvious conclusion from what they have done in the bill that the House Republicans passed, that Medicaid is smack on their target list. And that's obviously bad for Rhode Island. We were all recently at Women and Infants Hospital to point out that nearly half of births in Rhode Island are paid for by Medicaid. Medicaid picks up the bills for women and infants. And about 2/3 of Rhode Island nursing home residents get supported by the Medicaid program. So everybody knows somebody in Rhode Island who is receiving Medicaid. The other important thing on Medicaid is that it's a really important support for those working their way through opioid treatment. And I think, you know, we all know somebody in that situation and know how brave and difficult the path to recovery is. So attacking Medicaid hits real people in real ways. And if it is allowed to go forward, the pain in Rhode Island will be considerable. So is there any good news? Well, by relentlessly focusing on Trump's corruption and on the looting of the federal treasury to afford tax cuts to rapacious billionaires, and frankly, from some of Trump's own idiotic behavior, Trump's numbers are falling. He's now well underwater on the economy. The economy itself is sliding. There's a predicted drop in US GDP that will continue to build pressure on Republicans. Affordability was supposed to be Trump's big issue, but affordability is getting worse as prices continue to go up from tariffs, from the threat of tariffs that is disrupting markets, and from the climate effects on agriculture. And we're going to see that continue. So an economic storm is beginning to brew that is going to make it more and more difficult for Republicans to go along with the Trump-Musk scheme. And what comes next in the process is that they go from the budget resolution that set the top line numbers, and that's from which you conclude that Medicaid is a target, to the second piece of the parliamentary work where they actually have to write the law that cuts Medicaid. And then there's no hiding. Then it's clear what they're doing, and they have to sign off on that law. And if Trump is weakened and the economy continues to weaken, and we continue to focus effectively on the corruption and the looting of America for these billionaires, they could easily be in a position where, as Seth said, all they have to do is have 4 stand up in the House. All we have to have is 4 stand up in the Senate, and the madness can stop. We almost got to a bipartisan appropriations bill recently. Would have just taken 30 days to get there. All the ingredients were together. If the Republicans had wanted to end the madness and go back to regular bipartisan appropriations measures, the way was clear for them. They refused to do that. So they're responsible for what continues to happen. And that puts them in an even more difficult position as the reconciliation measure comes forward. So we have no actual legislative leverage on the CR because it bypasses the filibuster in the Senate. But with constant pressure on the Trump administration and consistently weakening economic news and more erratic, mad behavior in the Oval Office, a time will come when Republicans have to, for their own skins, start to undo some of this damage or steer away from some of this threatened damage. And that day cannot come soon enough. And all together, we have the ability to influence when that day comes. So we're leaned in all the way to make that day come soon. And I want to thank you all for your advocacy, because you and advocates like you, particularly in states where there's a Republican senator, are making all the difference. And with that, let me hand it over to Gabe Amo, who was celebrating Ireland Fund night last night with me. Good to see you again, Gabe.
Good to see you, Senator. And it's good to be on with everyone despite the circumstances that we face. And you know, I think I've reminded people of this. I'm not a sort of hair on fire kind of person, but we are in a crisis truly because there is an intention, a desire to wreak havoc and chaos on the systems and structures that protect people. And that's met with a lack of courage from so many of our Republican colleagues who are missing the mark on serving their constituents. And so, as you know, you've heard from you know, our great congressional team and Senators Rhode and Whitehouse and my colleague in the House, Congressman Gabe, you know, the speed, scope, and scale of the actions here are really unprecedented in a very significant way. And you know, I know they were able to take us through each of the big things that are being attacked in terms of Medicaid and just, you know, every segment of our community, whether it's folks in nursing homes, to the dental care that the people receive, to the pregnant women without care, to so many children and folks with disabilities. It's sweeping in impact, and you know, we need to make that very clear as we communicate with people across the state that you know, that no part of our population will go unharmed. You know, this week I spent time on the House floor to share stories of Rhode Islanders that have been impacted. One of them is a constituent who works with a nonprofit that relies on support from USAID. And, you know, she was worried that if she's the next one to get laid off, and you know how arbitrary, fast, and really reckless these terminations have been, and in addition to being illegal, you know, she's worried about that layoff leading to her having difficulty getting health care for her 2 young children. Why? Because of Republican cuts to Medicaid. If that's on the horizon, that combined with that job loss, that is a real problem. That's, you know, what we mean when we say all of this is connected. And, you know, my task today is to share a little bit about some other safety net programs that will be impacted by the ongoing assault and attack from Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Doge, and their associates, in addition to my colleagues in Congress, my Republican colleagues in Congress who are complicit in their silence. You know, for example, take housing, right? The Department of Housing and Urban Development hasn't delivered over $3 billion in federal funding for homelessness that was awarded in January. So this is, money that is targeted to an acute need that we have across this country, including Rhode Island, where that money has just not flowed. And on top of that, you might have seen in the headlines, the Elon and Doge team have proposed mass firings at HUD and closing field offices across the United States, and our region will not be spared. We know that Rhode Island's already facing a severe housing shortage. We talk about it a lot, where there's a great acknowledgement of the problem, right? But these damaging decisions from Washington, because of my Republican colleagues, will only make it harder to bring down rents and housing costs for Rhode Islanders. We don't have to see this. We don't have to go through this pain. People do not have to feel this hurt. I know earlier at the top of the presentation, Weayonnoh talked a little bit about the community eligibility provision and school meals, which is so important. I have the honor of serving on the House Budget Committee that was the sort of first round of action on the resolution that made it through to the full House floor. And in that debate during the committee, I introduced an amendment that would have blocked Republican cuts to SNAP and school breakfast and lunches for kids. Hungry kids, as we know, aren't going to learn as well as those who are well fed. It should not be controversial at all to feed kids. And so ultimately, while every Democrat in the committee stood up for this funding, every single Republican voted against my amendment in the committee, making it very clear that standing for the transfer of wealth to the concentration of wealth to the top 1% to billionaires is far more important to them than feeding hungry kids. And they had an opportunity to say differently and walked away from that multiple times. And so I can go, on and on and on, but as you've heard from my colleagues in the delegation here, they are fixated on these tax cuts. They're fixated on making sure that we all experience pain so that those who are wealthy and do not need any assistance get more. And so, one of the things that I get often, we get a report, as all of the members of the delegation probably have some version of this, where we have, a summary of the calls we got that week. And I am always hearing, certainly, we want you to do more. I'm concerned about Trump, but what's the plan? How are we fighting back? And I generally say falls across a few different lines. I've tried to isolate it to four. One, I think there's a lot of education of our community about what is going on. Settings like this, that's why this is so very important, to make sure that we're combating misinfo and disinfo, and we're relaying truth and the stories of impacts for people across Rhode Island. Why I spent time on the floor doing this. Why I think we heard Seth allude to the fact that we need to do more on social media. People are getting a lot of information from, frankly, a lot of places who are intent on blurring the facts. We have to make things clear. The second important thing is that agitation, is that showing up, it's that participating in democracy, from town halls to rallies to being out there and bringing forth public pressure, but also a united public voice. We know in Rhode Island, we got a delegation who was going to be on the side of Rhode Islanders. Not the case everywhere else, but we need to make sure that we give people that clarity that we are in this together. Of course, there's litigation. Thank you to the great team and the great leadership of Attorney General Noronha, who is helping in such a major way to bring forth these cases that are really slowing as much as they can the progress and path of destruction that Trump and Musk are bringing forth. And of course, that's a slower way to move, but we should be very clear that the actions that the Trump administration that are pursuing are illegal and are being halted by judges, certainly in Rhode Island and across the country, who are calling out the unlawful power grabs. And for example, there's a range of briefs, amicus briefs to the court that I know, for example, Congressman Magaziner and I are on one to prevent Trump from eliminating the Financial Protection Bureau. And then the last bit here is legislation. As you know, the stakes, are high, and with this particular continuing resolution that's in front of us, we lack the numbers, frankly, to stop that in its tracks. We had an alternative, 4 weeks to actually make it bipartisan and negotiate, as Senator Whitehouse said, but Republicans have refused. However, we, certainly I can speak for us in the House, will keep offering amendments, introducing legislation to say very clearly what our values are, and at the same time work hard to pull those 4 more Republicans over the line to stand up for Americans, stand up for their constituents, just like our delegation is working to stand up for Rhode Islanders. So I'm grateful to be on with you. It's an honor and privilege to work for Rhode Island. As Harry Truman said, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. We are in the kitchen right now. We are fighting every single day for Rhode Islanders, and I am, obviously down in this moment, but we can't stop. We don't have an option to stop. We have to keep going in our pursuit of a country that works to ensure that everybody can thrive. And so with that, let me turn it over to Andrew Schiff from the Food Bank.
Thank you, Congressman Amo. You've got us fired up. We want to take action, as Weayonnoh said, to not despair. There are options for us. Just to repeat what Congressman Amo said, we can get vocal on social. We should be in touch with friends and family who have a different political situation than we have in Rhode Island. In Rhode Island today, you've seen the amazing support we have from our congressional delegation. That's not true in other parts of the country. Contact your friends and family and educate them about what you learned today and why they need to get in touch with their members of Congress. If you would like to show your support for SNAP, the SNAP Challenge is being held next week. That's where individuals are asked to limit food purchase and consumption to $6 a day, because that's the SNAP allotment for an individual for one day, $6. You can sign up for the SNAP Challenge at the Food Research and Action Center. That's frac.org. Also on our website, rifoodbank.org, to show your support and become one of the thousands of people across the country who are taking the SNAP Challenge to say, look at what SNAP benefits are now, how difficult it is to feed yourself and your family on the SNAP benefits. We cannot let those benefits be cut. And now, while we have been listening to the congressional delegation, our Chief Philanthropy Officer, Lisa Roth-Blackman, has been watching and monitoring the questions that have come in through the Q&A. Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Andrew, and hello, everybody, and thank you for all of the great engagement and questions in the Q&A. Senator Reed, I think if I can turn to you first, to maybe try to just put a finer point on for people. There are questions about the badness of the CR versus the badness of the shutdown. And I just wonder if you can speak a little bit more to what we're looking at there and, why you're voting the way you plan to vote.
Well, I think it's important to send a very strong signal to the Trump administration and to the country that we can't tolerate his lack of following the law, for want of a better term. And he has consistently done this, and it's causing us great harm as a nation. There are my colleagues, who I respect immensely, who feel that if there is a shutdown, then there'll be even greater transgressions by Trump in terms of the law. But my view is we have to send a signal. We have to send a clear signal to the American public that we oppose Trump and that we have to do everything we can to stop him. And that's essentially the hub of the issue before us.
Senator Whitehouse, I wonder if you can speak a little bit. There are some questions about, and you spoke to sort of the implication of cuts to Medicaid and SNAP on families, but can you speak to what that means also for our local business community, the grocery stores, health centers, hospitals, and how devastating those cuts might be broadly in the state?
Yeah. So first, backstop what Jack said, because this is a very live issue in the Senate right now. There were three possibilities here. One was a proper, traditional, bipartisan appropriations bill, which we were easily 30 days out from concluding, as Jack knows from his work as an appropriator, that would have ended the madness and returned things back to regular Senate order. Republicans killed that. They wouldn't allow it to go forward. They left us these two choices between a CR, call it a CR, it's not really a CR, it's a fake CR that has been loaded up with improper powers for Trump and Musk, or a shutdown. And in shutdown mode, they basically run the government without Congress and with very little judiciary authority, with wide ability to shutter agencies, do mass firings, and frankly refuse to bring certain agencies back out of shutdown ever. The Republicans would have to propose who comes back out of shutdown. When do you think they would have brought the education department back out of shutdown? So they presented us with two really awful choices. And what they're counting on is the Democrats will fight with each other over those two choices rather than pay attention to where the real danger is, which is Trump and Musk and the Republicans who have set this all up and are trying to give Trump unbridled power to continue to destroy the government, as Seth said, for the benefit of the billionaires. Now, to your question, whether it's SNAP or Medicaid, these programs really support Rhode Island families. And we learned in COVID, when adequate support for Rhode Island families is there, we can get through even a crisis like COVID far better than if those resources aren't provided. Things like the child tax credit that we did at the time really lifted us. We did so much better through that COVID epidemic than we would have if it hadn't been for that government support. This is the backside of that. This is undercutting that support. And by undercutting that support, it is going to hurt the economy, because if you can't afford to pay for hospital bills for a child that is going to be born, and people have to fight over that bill, you're not going to be able to pay your grocery bill as readily. You're not going to be able to get tires on the car replaced. You're not going to be able to make necessary expenditures to go forward. So you're exactly right to point out that it's not just the point of pain through these cuts that suffers. That point of pain then retracts their further spending, and the whole Rhode Island economy will suffer. We saw the reverse case when there was adequate federal support through COVID. This will be the bad case.
Thank you, Senator. And Andrew and Weayonnoh, I want to invite you all. So we have all of our panelists on screen. Congressman Magaziner, can you speak? There's lots of questions in the Q&A about what pressure is being exerted on Republican colleagues and what, if anything, people can do here in Rhode Island, where, we've got you all as our representatives. But I think a window into what's happening behind the scenes, what hope is there of influencing and changing some of the positions of the Republicans?
Yeah, well, they're feeling the heat, for sure. I mean, you've probably seen some of the clips and the coverage about how Republican members of the House have stopped doing town halls because they were getting such an earful from their constituents, specifically about this, about Medicaid cuts and SNAP cuts and Elon Musk and his interns going through and firing people and cutting off funding. So they're feeling the heat. We just got to keep that pressure on. And yeah, there's an inside game and an outside game that is being played. So, I've got relationships with some of these vulnerable Republicans, and I have been nagging them and torturing them. as far as the public goes, there are organizations out there that are organizing phone campaigns and letter writing campaigns, and I encourage you to go and find some of those. But I can't stress enough the importance of communicating in the digital space. In the last election, Kamala Harris won pretty handily with voters who get most of their news from television or from newspapers. And she lost huge with voters who get their news online. And this is particularly an issue with younger voters. The average age of a CNN viewer is 71. The average age of a Fox News viewer is 69. The average age of an MTV viewer is 51. Like, television is just not where a lot of people are getting their news from anymore. They're getting it online. The good news with that, though, is that everybody on this call, everybody on the Zoom, if you're watching, like, you can be a content creator and you can influence people not only in your neighborhood, but all across the country. So tell your stories online, get engaged online, because voters in all of these districts across the country will see it, will hear it, and there's a real opportunity for everyone. It's a different kind of organizing, but it does have an impact. And again, 220 Republicans in the House. We only need to flip 4 out of 220. We only need to flip, 2% of them on any given issue. So every little bit matters. It is possible. I can tell you a lot of these conversations are happening on the House floor, in the House gym. Like, we're torturing them, but they need to hear it from the public as well. And I do believe we can be successful.
Thank you. Congressman Amo, there's some questions also, I think, and maybe you can shed a little bit more light on the broad cuts to the Department of Education, and how does that affect school meals? And people are very worried about, student support and student learning and having access to meals and all sorts of other resources.
Well, thank you for that. And in fact, one of the things I was at this morning, I was with some former colleagues of mine in the Biden administration who were gathering folks who had worked in the Department of Education to talk about some of the impacts that they've felt over the last few days in particular. I mean, we've got wholesale sweeping elimination of roles at the department and in regional offices as well. And so, the challenge here is the erosion of personnel to run these programs and ensure compliance, not just in the education department, but also at USDA. This is, part of what I think their plan is. The plan is to make things broken, make them not work, then make a case why their ineffectiveness requires their elimination. And this you see across the board in the strategy of Trump and Musk, and certainly the complicit silence of my Republican colleagues in Congress. And so every part of the ecosystem is connected. It will lead to delays in payments going out, or just not making those payments. It will lead to program ineffectiveness. So that's just one part of the issue when you talk about, and certainly with the light to nutrition. But let's not forget the important funding for Title I schools, the important funding for IDEA, supporting our students with disabilities. We have a Secretary of Education who does not even know the core functions of the department, as she has demonstrated a lack of interest in knowing what the department does, except for the existential mandate that she's been given to close it. So, these are real problems, but to the points that have been made, this is not a red or blue state set of challenges. if you have a child who is going to experience pain, it's not going to matter where you live in the country. If you have students in schools who are not going to get adequate funding, that is not limited to a certain part of the country. And so this is why the sharing our narratives, making sure we're breaking through not only the digital space, but the sort of relationships we have with people in our lives across the country. We have to share the experiences, we have to share the impact, and we have to make sure that we are all, communicating how terrible these actions are.
I'm going to have to take a minute and excuse myself. We've got the proposed CMS director, Oz, up in finance now, and I've got a summons from Schumer, and Jack and I have a vote at 11. So forgive me. But to Andrew's
Give me too.
remark about despair, remember Edmund Burke, never despair, but when you do, work on in despair. That's my latest motto. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thank you very much, too. Thank you.
If we've got a few more minutes for those who can stay, Andrew, there is a question for you, picking up on the question about school meals, about the community eligibility provision that Weayonnoh talked about before that enables many more kids to get free meals. And how does that interact with the proposed bill in Rhode Island to provide free school meals for kids?
Well, if the federal government makes it more difficult for kids to receive free school meals by making the application for those meals burdensome and a hardship for families, in the end, it's just going to mean either that kids don't eat or the state steps in and has to invest in making up for the cuts from the feds. It's simply going to cost more for Rhode Island to make sure that all children are receiving free school meals. And community eligibility was made possible because people who work closely with the school lunch and breakfast programs knew that it was a way to make the program easier to access. Simply that. And to take that away is really, at its core, an attempt to deny kids lunch and breakfast to be able to reduce the cost to the federal government of those programs. And it is a terrible thing to take food out of the mouths of children.
Thank you. And Weayonnoh, last question to you. Can you speak a little bit more to help people understand the cost sharing proposals and what are the implications for states and Rhode Island in particular about the possibility of even having the funds to be able to do that should those kind of cuts come down?
Yeah, so a couple of things are at play, especially with the Medicaid and SNAP. Those are the biggest cuts. What is in the proposal is, one, to cut those programs, right? So people are going to be impacted. So that's what we're talking about when you hear that $880 billion cut to Medicaid and $230 billion cut to SNAP. And the way you do it is a lot of different ways. One, you could cut how many people are eligible. So they could do it in different ways. For SNAP, for example, and Medicaid, right now there's not a work requirement for Medicaid. So cutting Medicaid could including a work requirement that will allow a lot of people who are currently eligible to no longer be eligible. That is very risky because you can cut money, but when you put in structure in programs, it's really hard to step back. And so if work requirements is added to Medicaid or additional work requirements are added to SNAP, it's going to be hard to step back from those. And that is going to eliminate how many people are eligible for those programs. So that's one option on how these cuts will be implemented. The other piece is now to tell states, well, you have to cover X amount of money, and we're looking at millions of dollars towards the state. So for example, I share for Medicaid cuts, Rhode Island could be pulled up to pay up to $300 million to be able to meet the balance for what we're receiving from Medicaid. For SNAP, for example, there are different scenarios. The Republicans are really holding their cards close as to what these cuts will really look at. And so we're getting information in piecemeal at this point. And so the cost of states, we're looking at, even if it's a 10% cost for SNAP benefits that Rhode Island have to pay, that's about $17 million we'll have to pay out of our budget. If it's 25%, that's over $85 million we'll have to pay over our budget. Our current state proposed budget has about 35% of our money coming from the federal government. And so that will add to our deficit. Rhode Island, I don't think we can do much to have a stopgap and pay for what may be coming our way if these cost shifts are sent to Rhode Island. And so we will have to make decisions to cut more people off these benefits or come up with a way to raise revenue to be able to fit in the gap that's coming our way from the federal government. And we already have a current state deficit that we need to figure out. So either way, we really have to create a Rhode Island-based plan with scenarios about what those cuts might be and how we can meet that without cutting people off these programs that they need to survive.
Thank you very much. We're over time, so Andrew, I'm going to turn it over to you to wrap it up and maybe reinforce what actions people can take.
Yeah, I just want to say how grateful we are that the congressional delegation, as busy as they are in the middle of votes and committees, were able to join us. Thanks to Senator Rhode, Senator Whitehouse, Representative Magaziner, Representative Amo, and thanks to you, Weayonnoh, for chairing this meeting today. I really appreciate it. And, you know, we've said we want people to stay vocal. And as Congressman Magaziner said, particularly on social media, contact your friends and family in other states, educate them about what you heard today. And if you can, take the SNAP challenge and show your support for SNAP. Weayonnoh?
No, same. Thanks. I'm grateful to our partners at the food bank. United Way put out United is the way. I think as Rhode Island, we have to come together and come together with solutions. So I appreciate you all and I appreciate our delegation for joining us today.
And we will share out the slides and we'll try to share out some other information about the SNAP challenge and the recording of this for those that couldn't join. So that'll come out in email soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.